The sun had barely risen over the city skyline when Elijah Brooks stepped out of his modest apartment, adjusting his tie with the quiet focus of a man who had done this routine 1,000 times. His breath clouded the morning air as he locked his door and turned toward the bus stop. A high school history teacher, father of 2, and a man who had never once missed jury duty. Elijah believed in rules even when the world often forgot to play by them. But that morning, the world decided it no longer recognized Elijah Brooks, not as a man, not as a teacher, not even as a human being. As he walked past a corner store on Jefferson Avenue, 2 patrol cars suddenly swung around and skidded to a halt. The doors flung open, and out came 3 white officers, guns already drawn, shouting over one another like they were preparing for war. On the ground. Get on the damn ground now. Elijah froze, his hands raised high. I'm just going to work, he stammered, heart thundering in his chest. I teach at Eastside High. My ID's in my pocket. But they didn't care. They didn't hear him, or maybe they didn't. Dan chose not to listen. One officer shoved him against a cold sidewalk. Another drove his knee into Elijah's back, twisting his arm behind him, while the third barked something about matching a description: 6-foot black male, gray slacks, black jacket. It didn't matter that Elijah was wearing brown corduroys and a blue sweater. No one was listening. He wasn't a teacher anymore. He wasn't a father. In their eyes, he was just Black. By the time they hauled him into the back of the cruiser, blood from a busted lip had started to dry on his chin. His briefcase lay abandoned on the street, papers fluttering like dying birds in the wind. Inside the police station, Elijah tried again. I'm not who you think I am. You've got the wrong guy. Please just check my ID. Call the school. I've never even been arrested. A white detective leaned across the table, eyes cold, voice casual. You ever been around Jefferson and 12th before? I live 3 blocks from there, Elijah said quietly. The detective smirked. Figures. That's when Elijah knew this wasn't about facts. It wasn't about truth. It was about a system that had already decided what he was hours past. No one called his school. No one called his wife. Instead, they charged him with robbery and assault accusations, so wild they might have been pulled out of a hat. They claimed he fit the description of a man who held up a liquor store with a crowbar the night before. Elijah's hands shook as they fingerprinted him. He barely heard the flash of the camera capturing his mugshot. One of the officers joked, "Smiley, your students'll love this in the yearbook." He didn't even blink. When he was finally given one phone call, his wife didn't pick up. She was probably at work, or calling his school wondering where he was. He left a message, voice calm but trembling underneath. "Babe, it's me. I need you to come down to the precinct. They've made a mistake, a bad one." In the holding cell, Elijah sat on the cold bench, staring at the cracks in the concrete wall. An older black man in the corner watched him quietly, then finally said, "First time." Elijah nodded. The man gave a bitter chuckle. "They don't need truth, they just need a face to blame. And yours'll do just fine." That night, Elijah didn't sleep, not because of the hard floor or the fluorescent lights, but because somewhere deep inside, he felt something breaking. Not hope, not yet, but trust. He had done everything right his whole life, and now, none of it mattered. The next morning, a public defender finally showed up. A tired white woman in her 40s, clutching a thick stack of case files. She introduced herself as Maya Kellerman, then glanced at him. "You're Elijah Brooks. You're the history teacher, right?" Elijah nodded eagerly, like finally someone would see. She looked at her notes, brow furrowing. "You've never been arrested. No priors. You're a community volunteer. This doesn't make sense." Elijah leaned forward. "Because it's wrong." Maya sighed. "I believe you, but belief doesn't win courtrooms. Evidence does. And right now, they say a witness identified you." His stomach dropped. "What witness?" "An elderly store clerk," he said. "The man wore a hoodie. You didn't, but he picked you out of a photo lineup." Elisha stared at the wall, jaw tightening. "You know why he picked me?" Maya didn't answer. She didn't have to. That afternoon, he was arraigned. Standing in front of a white judge in a courtroom filled with white jurors and white attorneys, Elijah felt like he was watching himself from behind glass. How his charges were read aloud: armed robbery, aggravated assault. He could barely breathe. His wife sat in the back row, tears silently streaming down her face. When the judge denied bail, citing possible flight risk, Elijah didn't argue. He just stood still, eyes forward, like a soldier who had long accepted the war was rigged. Back in the jail transport van, he closed his eyes and remembered the morning he taught his class about the Emancipation Proclamation. He remembered asking his students, "What does freedom mean when the system still owns your image?" Now he knew the answer: nothing. It had been 12 days since Elijah Brooks last stood in his classroom. 12 days since he passed out quizzes about civil rights, since he'd held chalk between his fingers, or heard the rustle of restless students whispering in the back row. Now, his classroom sat quiet, his name erased from the whiteboard, his future suspended in fluorescent stillness. And in that same span of time, the world had already labeled him guilty. The courtroom was larger than Elijah expected. Cold, sterile, and two white walls, white tiles, white benches, white faces. When the bailiff led him in wearing a tan jumpsuit, wrists cuffed in front of him, Elijah felt like a museum exhibit from another ERO, when they refused to admit, still existed. His public defender, Maya whispered as he sat down. We filed the motion to dismiss. I'm not hopeful, but we had to try. He didn't reply. He just looked straight ahead at the judge, the same one who denied him, bail Judge Ronald Myers. With silver hair slicked back and a face carved from marble. Opposite them sat the prosecution, a young assistant district attorney named Colin Price, suited, confident, and indifferent. The trial hadn't even begun, and Elijah already knew the outcome was rooted in more than evidence. It was rooted in the eyes watching him. The jury, 11 white faces. One, ambiguous, maybe Hispanic. Not a single black person among them. Each wore polite neutrality like a mask. But Elijah could feel it, the quiet dread, the loaded curiosity, the question behind every glance. What did he do? The prosecution's first witness was the store clerk, Mr. Hammondan, elderly white man with thick glasses and a quivering voice. He recounted the night of the robbery. A man with a crowbar stormed in, yelled for cash, knocked over a shelf, and ran. He said he never saw the man's full face, just the dark skin and hoodie. And you identified the defendant? The prosecutor asked. Hammond nodded. He looked familiar. Matched what I remembered. They showed me pictures. I picked him out. Maya stood to Sir, did the man wear glasses? No. Elijah Brooks, does he wears glasses daily? Did you notice a beard? No, I didn't see that much. Elijah has a full beard. Did the man speak during the robbery? He shouted. Sounded angry. Elijah teaches speech and literature. Do you believe you could distinguish his voice from a stranger's? The man hesitated. I'm not sure. Maybe. And there it was. Maybe. A word soft enough to erase doubt, but dangerous enough to ruin a man. The second witness was a detective, who described finding a hoodie behind a dumpster for blocks. From Elijah's apartment. No DNA. No fingerprints. Just a hoodie and a theory. Elijah lives in the area, the detective said. It lines up geographically. Geography, as if location could determine guilt. As if his zip code was the crime. At the lunch recess, Maya pulled Elijah into a private room. They won't drop it. They're doubling down. But listen, your school sent a statement. They're vouching for you. Your students started a petition. We're at 2,000 signatures. Elijah's eyes welled. They still believe me. She nodded. Some people do. He wiped his eyes, laughing bitterly. Imagine that. A black man needing a petition just to be treated like a human. Back in court, the prosecution presented a security tape from a blurry corner camera only. A silhouette in a hoodie could be seen. No face, no voice, no proof. But the jury leaned forward. Because the shape vaguely matched, that was all they needed to justify suspicion. Maya asked for a moment of silence in court. I asked the jury to look at this man, she said, voice clear. Not through fear, not through the filter of headlines or race. Just look. She turned to Elijah. He stood. The courtroom went quiet. His hands were clasped, his head slightly bowed, in shame, but in dignity. Does this man strike you as someone who'd terrify a store clerk with a crowbar? Maya asked. But they weren't looking at Elijah. They were looking at a symbol, a frame, a color, a question with an answer already written. Later that evening, Maya sat in the holding room with Elijah. She looked exhausted, her eyes heavy, her blazer wrinkled. They offered a deal, she said. Plead guilty to a lesser charge. 6 months. No felony record. Elijah's head jerked up. 6 months. For something I didn't do. I know, Maya said softly. It's not right, but if you lose at trial, it's years. He stared at the table. No, Elijah. No. He said again, firmer. They don't get to erase my life because it's easier. I won't become the lie they need me to be. She looked at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Then we fight. The next day, Maya brought character witnesses. His school principal testified first. Elijah is the kind of teacher you dream your kids will get, she said. He runs after-school tutoring, gives his own money for students' lunches. He's patient, steady, respected. His wife spoke next, voice trembling as she held up their wedding photo. He reads bedtime stories. He braids our daughter's hair. He's never raised his voice in anger. The jury listened, polite, but unchanged. Then came Elijah's turn to speak. The courtroom went still as he stepped up to the stand. I've been a black man in America my whole life, he said slowly. I've spent it doing everything I was told to do to be safe, educated, employed. Polite, cooperative. He glanced at the jury. And it wasn't enough. He told them about the morning of his arrest, the students he never got to teach that day, the humiliation, the silence. They didn't ask me who I was, they just decided. And now I'm fighting not just for freedom, but for my name. He paused. I'm not on trial because of what I did. I'm on trial because of what I look like. Maya's voice cracked during closing statements. This case is not about justice. It's about assumption. A rushed ID, a hoodie, a face. That's not proof. That's profiling. But the prosecutor struck a different chord. You have a man. You have proximity. You have a victim who believed. You don't need beyond all doubts, just beyond reasonable doubt. And that was the weapon. Reasonable, a word that had never been reasonable to men like Elijah. The jury deliberated for hours. Each tick of the clock in that cold room stretched like a wire through Elijah's chest. When the door finally opened and the foreperson stepped forward, Elijah held his breath. The judge asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" The answer was soft, but final, "Yes, Your Honor." The courtroom air felt heavier that morning, as if the walls themselves knew the gravity of what was about to happen. The bailiff's voice echoed as he called the room to order. Every shuffle of a chair, every cough, every creak of the wood benches seemed sharper. Crueler. Elijah Brooks stood when instructed. His wrists were free of cuffs this time, but his freedom was still in question. He scanned the faces of the jury as they filed in, most looking down, a few glancing at him briefly before quickly turning away. That avoidance told him more than any speech could. Judge Meyer's voice cut through the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged white woman with neatly pressed hair, rose slowly. She held a folded piece of paper like it was a piece of glass that might shatter. Double quotes, "Yes, Your Honor." She handed the verdict to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Myers read it, his face giving away nothing. On the charge of armed robbery, he began, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elijah Brooks." A pause, so long, Elijah swore he could hear his own pulse in his ears. "Guilty." It was as if the floor fell out from under him. His knees stayed locked, but his chest caved in. He could feel Maya's sharp inhale beside him, her hand gripping the edge of the defense table like she might crush it. The judge continued, "On the charge of aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty." His wife, seated in the second row, covered her mouth with both hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her shoulders trembling. Somewhere behind her, a muffled gasp came from one of his former students, who had snuck into the back row. Elijah didn't move. He didn't blink. He had always imagined that if this day ever came, he'd scream, fight, yell, protest. But all he felt was an eerie stillness. Because what was the point? His words hadn't mattered before. They wouldn't matter now. The prosecution looked pleased, but not triumphant. This was routine for them, a notch in a belt. Another win on the board. Colin Price, the ADA, straightened his tie as if he'd just completed a well-rehearsed performance. Maya whispered fiercely, "We will appeal. This is not over." But to Elijah, it already felt over. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, Elijah stepped forward. His voice was steady, but each syllable carried the weight of years of silent endurance. "I was raised to believe the system works," he said, looking directly at the judge. "That truth has a voice here. But I've learned something different. In this room, truth isn't a voice, it's a volume. And mine was never loud enough for you to hear." He turned slightly toward the jury. "You saw a man? I saw a mirror. And I hope someday, when you look into one, you see the choice you made today." The judge shifted uncomfortably, then proceeded with the sentence. 15 years in state prison. Eligibility for parole after 15 years. For a crime he hadn't committed. The bailiff moved toward him, cuffs ready. Elijah glanced one last time at his wife. She mouthed the words, "I love you," but her eyes told him she was breaking inside. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As they led him out, he caught sight of the media clustered by the doors. Cameras clicked, flashes popped, another headline in the making. But none of those cameras would capture the truth. They never did. Prison transport van was cold, smelling of rust and damp fabric. Elijah sat shackled to another man, both silent. Outside, the city blurred past the window, people walking, cars moving, life continuing as if nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Prison intake was mechanical. Strip, search, uniform, number. A man who once had students raising their hands now had guards barking orders. His blue sweater and corduroys were gone. His identity swapped for a beige uniform and a 6-digit inmate ID. That night, lying on a thin mattress under the dim light, Elijah thought about his students. Did they know? Were they ashamed to have his name on their transcripts? Or did they still believe him? He thought about the store clerk, Hammond. Was he home now, eating dinner, unaware or uncaring that his words had dismantled another man's life? He thought about Maya, already drafting the appeal, already planning the next move, and he thought about whether any of it would matter. Days bled into weeks. The prison yard became a strange theater where every move was calculated. Elijah kept his head down, reading books from the library cart, avoiding the undercurrents of tension. Still, whispers followed him about the teacher who robbed a store. One evening, as the sun bled orange over the yard, an older inmate approached him. "You're the guy from TV," he said. Elijah looked up, wary. "Guess so." The man shook his head slowly. "You didn't do it." It wasn't a question. Elijah studied him. How do you know? The man smirked faintly. I've been here 30 years. I know guilty. You ain't it. For the first time in months. Elijah almost smiled. Meanwhile, outside prison walls, Maya was relentless. She dug through records, cross-checked timelines, interviewed neighbors, tracked down grainy surveillance from 2 streets away. And then one late night she found it. A time-stamped video showing Elijah walking into the school gym at the exact time of the robbery. It was shaky, low resolution, but it was something. She filed for an appeal hearing, and for the first time since his arrest, Elijah let himself hope not for freedom yet, but for a crack in the wall that surrounded him. The news of the appeal moved through the prison like smoke fast, invisible to some, suffocating to others. Elijah tried not to let it show, but the possibility of a second chance kept flickering inside him like a match that wouldn't go out. In the library one afternoon, he sat at a worn wooden table, flipping through a history book. His students would have laughed to see him there, still reading about the same subjects he once taught, but this time, the words about justice and liberty felt like they belonged to another planet. The guard called his name, Brooks. Visit. He closed the book and walked out, the chains at his ankles clinking with each step. In the small visitor's room, Maya sat at the table with 2 thick folders in front of her. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Elijah, she began, I've got good news and bad news. He sat down slowly. Start with the bad. The DA's office is fighting the appeal. They're claiming the new footage is too low quality to be conclusive. Elijah clenched his jaw. And the good? She slid a still image across the table. It was grainy, but the outline was clear enough. A tall black man in a blue sweater entering the East Side High Gymnasium. The timestamp matched the exact minute of the robbery. This, she said, is you. We have a witness from the school who can testify. You were there. Elijah looked at the photo for a long time. So we might actually win. Maya hesitated. We might. The appeal hearing was set for 3 months later. In prison, time didn't pass. Crawled. Days were measured in meals, roll calls, and the way the sun cut across the yard. Elijah spent his mornings reading, afternoons working in the laundry, and evenings writing letters to his wife and kids. One night, under the dim light of his cell, he wrote a line that stayed with him. I'm not fighting just for me. I'm fighting for the next black man they decide to make an example of. When the day came, the courtroom was smaller than the first trial, but no less tense. Elijah entered in his beige prison uniform, escorted by 2 guards. Maya sat beside him, arranging her notes, her movements precise and deliberate. The judge for the appeal, an older, black man named Judge Robert Ellison, watched them enter. It was the first time since his arrest that Elijah saw someone in a robe who looked like him. It didn't guarantee fairness, but it felt like a breath of air after months underwater. Maya presented the video evidence first. The defense's tech expert explained how the timestamp matched school records, how Elijah's height and clothing were consistent with the footage. A fellow teacher testified that she saw Elijah at the gym, helping set up for a student event. The DA countered with Hammond, the store clerk. Again. This time he seemed less certain, his voice faltering under cross-examination. Could you be mistaken? Maya asked. Hammond swallowed. Maybe. It was quick. I thought it was him. Judge Ellison leaned forward. Mr. Hammond, the law doesn't operate on maybe. It operates on proof. The words landed like a small thunderclap in the quiet room. After hours of testimony, the judge called for a recess. Elijah sat back, his pulse hammering in his ears. What do you think? He asked Maya. She didn't answer directly. We gave them more than enough to doubt. That's all we needed to do. When they returned, Judge Ellison delivered his decision. This court finds that the evidence presented at trial was insufficient to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Furthermore, new evidence has emerged that places the defendant elsewhere at the time of the crime. Therefore, the conviction is vacated. Elijah blinked. The words took a moment to land. Vacated, not overturned because of a technicality. Vacated because he was innocent. But before relief could flood in, the DA stood. Your Honor, we intend to retry the case. Elijah's stomach dropped. Maya slammed her folder shut. On what grounds? You have no case left. The judge sighed. The prosecution is within their rights. A retrial date will be set. Elijah felt the hope drain from him like water slipping through cupped hands. He wasn't free yet. Back in prison, the news spread quickly, some inmates clapping him on the back, others shaking their heads. They ain't gonna let you walk easy. One man said, you rattled their cage. Elijah lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. Freedom was close enough to see, but still locked behind a gate only they could open. He wasn't sure how much longer he could stand on that line. Maya visited the next day. They're bluffing, she said. They want you scared enough to take a plea. We're not doing that. He nodded slowly. Then we go again. Her eyes softened. We go again. The retrial began like déjà vu. Same courthouse, same hallways that smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish, same metal detector at the entrance. But Elijah walked in different now. Months in prison had stripped away the polished edges of his patience. He wasn't here to impress anyone anymore. He was here to survive the truth. Maya walked beside him, her files organized into neat stacks. She looked more determined than ever, tired but sharp, like a blade honed from constant use. This time, she whispered, "We don't just defend you, we dismantle them." The courtroom felt smaller this time. Maybe it was because the jury wasn't entirely white anymore. 2 black jurors, 1 Latino, and a younger white woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Elijah didn't know if it would make a difference, but it was something. The prosecution's opening argument was weaker now. They no longer had Hammond's confident identification. He'd admitted in pretrial interviews that he wasn't sure anymore. They had no fingerprints, no DNA, no crowbar, and no motive. Just a hoodie and a theory. Maya's opening was different from last time, too. She didn't start with facts. She started with Elijah. "This man," she said, pointing toward him, "teaches history. He tells his students that the truth matters. And yet, for the past year, every institution meant to protect truth has failed him. This is your chance to fix that." The witnesses came and went. The DA tried to revive the idea of proximity to the crime scene. Maya tore it apart with bus schedules, traffic cams, and the gym footage. She brought in students who testified. Elijah was at the school, helping hang decorations for a cultural heritage event. One student, a shy sophomore named Malik, spoke into the microphone with surprising firmness. "Mr. Brooks told me once that the truth always comes out if you keep telling it. I'm here because I believe him." Elijah kept his face neutral, but inside, those words cracked something open. When it was Elijah's turn to take the stand, he didn't talk about the arrest or the trial. He talked about the mornings he walked to work, about the history lessons he taught, about the faces of his students when they learned something new. Then he paused. "And I want to go back to that," he said quietly. "Not because prison is hard, though it is, not because my name has been dragged through the mud, though it has, but because I refuse to let a lie write my story." Closing arguments came 2 days later. The prosecutor tried to frame the case as a mystery with unanswered questions. Maya countered with a single sentence that seemed to hang in the air long after she spoke it. "An unanswered question is not the same as proof." The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. When they filed back in, Elijah gripped the edge of the defense table, knuckles white. The foreperson stood. "On all charges," she said, "we find the defendant not guilty." The words didn't hit him all at once. They came in pieces, not, then guilty, then the finality of it washing over him like cold rain. Maya exhaled, a small smile breaking through her fatigue. His wife sobbed openly, rushing forward to hold him as the judge dismissed the case. For the first time in over a year, no one was holding him back. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed. Microphones were shoved in his face. How does it feel to be free? He stopped on the steps, the sun warm on his skin. He thought about answering with anger, with gratitude, with exhaustion. But what came out was simple. "I was always free. You just finally caught up to the truth." Freedom didn't feel like fireworks, that it felt like walking into his apartment and seeing dust on the bookshelves. Like boiling water for tea and realizing he didn't have any milk. Like lying in his own bed and not hearing the clang of metal doors at night. It felt quiet. Weeks later, Elijah stood in front of his class again. The desks were filled with curious faces, some old, some new. He didn't mention prison. He didn't have to. They already knew. Instead, he wrote one sentence on the board. "History isn't just what happened, it's who gets to tell it." He turned to his students. "Now," he said, "let's talk about who's been telling yours." The scars were still there on his record, in his bank account, in the wary glances from people who had read the headlines but not the follow-up. But they were just that, scars, not chains. And every time he looked in the mirror, he reminded himself they had tried to take his name, his career, his freedom. They failed.